The sun of Cindervale was a molten sphere hanging low over the crimson horizon, casting shadows that rippled like liquid metal across the mining fields. The air shimmered with the heat of machinery, the hum of excavator drones and the rhythmic pulse of the ore furnaces blended into a mechanical symphony that never stopped. Ethan Cole moved through it all like a ghost, a thin figure wrapped in dust and silence, his boots sinking into the reddish grit. His days were built on repetition, recalibrating thermal conduits, replacing worn servos, eating alone in the mess hall beneath a flickering lamp. The colony lived by the clockwork logic of survival, and Ethan found comfort in that routine, until the tremors began. At first, they were subtle, mistaken for the usual seismic murmurs caused by deep drilling. But this morning, the tremor came with sound, a distant, rhythmic thudding that echoed through the canyons like the beating of enormous wings. Dust spilled from the rafters. A loading crane jerked mid-motion, screeching to a halt. The air tasted of iron and ozone. Ethan lifted his head from the open panel of a service drone and frowned. No tremor should have reached this sector. He keyed his wrist pad, but the network stuttered, connection unstable. Voices filled the comm line, shouted reports, static, panic. Sector 9, something moving under the dunes, visual confirmation, biological, repeat, biological. The words made no sense. There were no animals on Cindervale except the hardy imports, lizards, rodents, cloned beasts built for low oxygen. The desert didn't breathe. It consumed. By the time Ethan reached the outer hangar, the sky had changed. The sun's glow fractured against a swirling haze, sand lifted by something vast and living. Shapes moved in the dust, fluid, powerful, impossibly fast. For a moment, one figure broke through the veil, a creature with scales catching the light like molten glass, eyes like burning coins. Ethan froze. Childhood stories surged back, the ones told in whispers about the Great Purge, when humankind burned the last dragons from the sky to claim the frontier worlds. But myths weren't supposed to breathe. A warning siren screamed. Automated turrets locked onto targets. Energy bolts cut through the air, striking sand and stone, lighting the desert with white fire. The shapes scattered, shrieking, high, piercing tones that made every nerve in Ethan's body recoil. The ground split open near the refinery, sending molten dust into the sky. He stumbled backward, shielded his face from the blast, and saw them more clearly, for creatures, small but fierce, their wings ragged as if freshly torn from eggs. Hatchlings. They were starving. The youngest one turned toward him, trembling yet unafraid, smoke curling from its nostrils. Around them, chaos reigned, colonists shouting, turrets overheating, the sky choked with flame. But Ethan could not move. In that instant, staring into those wild, desperate eyes, he felt something older than fear, recognition. The universe was vast, full of mechanical miracles and artificial minds, but here before him was something primal and fragile, something that had survived extinction only to meet humanity again. The hatchling took a step closer, its claws sinking into the dust. Ethan's wristpad flashed red, evacuate sector immediately, yet he stayed still, watching the creature tilt its head as if asking a question neither of them had language for. Somewhere in the distance, the colony's defense cannons charged again, and the world filled with the low hum of weapons preparing to erase a legend. The first blast hit the dunes like thunder. Light split the horizon, burning white through the storm of sand. Ethan threw himself behind a cargo crawler as molten fragments rained across the hangar bay. The air became a furnace, electric, vibrating, alive. Through the gaps in the machinery, he saw them again, for hatchlings darting between plasma bursts, their movements clumsy but fast, their scales glinting like shards of liquid metal. One screamed, a sound that made the glass in the bay tremble. It wasn't anger, it was hunger, pain, confusion. Above, defense drones spiraled down from the perimeter grid, firing blue beams that carved glowing trails through the air. The colony's automated voice announced over the comm, * containment protocol engaged. All unauthorized lifeforms will be neutralized. Ethan's chest tightened. Life forms. That was all they were to the system, targets. He ran for the control tower, weaving through chaos. Colonists scattered, clutching what little they could carry. A medic bot word passed, dragging a wounded miner by the arms. The smell of scorched polymer and ozone filled his lungs. He reached the console and slammed his hand against the interface, trying to override the drone network. The system refused. Access denied, it repeated, calm and unyielding. Through the shattered window he saw one hatchling collapse, its wing torn by an energy pulse. The others circled protectively, hissing, their throats glowing with the heat of their own internal fires. Ethan's rational mind screamed to stay down, but something deeper pulled him toward them. He sprinted back through the hangar, the ground vibrating with every pulse cannon impact. The smallest dragon lifted its head weakly, eyes unfocused. He dropped to his knees beside it. Up close, it was a strange blend of alien biology and elegance, a living fusion of scales and filaments that faintly hummed like a power cell. Its body emitted low-frequency vibrations, almost like a frequency meant to resonate with the planet itself. Ethan reached out without thinking. The skin beneath the scales was warm, trembling. Then the power grid failed. The colony plunged into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the fading glow of molten sand outside. The automated guns went silent. The hatchlings froze, sensing the shift. For the first time, there was no sound but their breathing and the distant hum of wind moving across the plains. Ethan swallowed hard and whispered, "You're just scared, aren't you?" The smallest one responded, not with a growl, but a curious tilt of the head. Its pupils widened, adjusting to the dim light. He opened his utility pack, hands shaking, and found his lunch tin. The smell of bread and stew slipped into the air. One of the hatchlings flared its nostrils, a low trill rising from its throat. Somewhere behind him, a soldier shouted his name, but Ethan didn't turn. He tore a piece of bread in half and held it out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature leaned forward, hesitant but drawn by something older than instinct. The bread vanished between sharp teeth, and the hatchling's throat pulsed with a faint light. Outside, the other dragons stopped their restless pacing. They turned toward the hangar, their eyes flickering like distant stars. Ethan didn't yet understand what had begun, but as the colony's systems rebooted and warning sirens flickered back to life, the hatchlings didn't attack. They only watched him, their faces softening in the dim glow, as if waiting for him to do it again. Morning on Cindervale came with a pale red haze and silence heavy enough to feel artificial. The colony's power grid flickered back online, restoring lights across the damaged outposts, but no one spoke of what had happened in the night. The dragons had retreated beyond the dunes, leaving the hangar scorched and the air tinged with ozone. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat by the hangar door, the metal lunch tin still open beside him, staring into the desert. He didn't know why he had stayed alive. By every rational measure, he should have been ash. The colony's commander arrived at dawn, accompanied by drones that scanned the ground with blue beams. "You engaged unauthorized contact," she said flatly, her voice filtered through the mask. "You jeopardized the colony's defense protocol." Ethan didn't answer. The drones beeped and moved away, tracing claw marks burned into the soil. One of them paused at the spot where he had shared his bread, sensors flickering as if confused. "You don't understand," Ethan murmured. They weren't attacking. They were starving. By noon, word had spread. Some called him insane, others whispered that he had tamed monsters. The truth was less dramatic. The hatchlings hadn't returned to attack. They watched from the canyon ridge, eyes glinting like distant beacons. When night fell again, Ethan found himself walking beyond the safety perimeter, guided by something between curiosity and guilt. The air temperature dropped sharply. His wrist pad lost connection, static crackling through its interface. Then the low hum returned. The same vibration he had felt when he touched the hatchling skin. It wasn't random. It was patterned. Almost musical. The first one appeared from the sand, head low, wings tucked. Ethan stopped, heart pounding. Slowly, he crouched and placed the tin in front of him. He broke the bread again. The dragon approached, nostrils flaring. Then another joined, and another, until the shadows of 4 surrounded him. They ate silently, each movement measured, as if mimicking his calm. The air shimmered faintly with residual heat around their bodies, a living aura that bent light itself. When they finished, the smallest nudged the tin back toward him with its snout. Ethan froze, breath caught. It was a gesture, simple, deliberate. He realized then that they were trying to understand him as much as he was them. He raised his hand slowly and drew a small circle in the sand. The hatchling copied the motion with a claw, tracing it clumsily. Something electric passed between them, not sound, not touch, resonance. Back at the colony, automated scanners picked up faint bioelectric surges radiating from the canyon, growing stronger with each night. Command issued new orders: prepare the plasma cannons. They believed the dragons were gathering for a second attack. Ethan knew better. He looked up at the ridge where the hatchlings now perched, wings catching the starlight. In their eyes he saw reflection, not of prey or enemy, but of recognition. And in the silent rhythm that pulsed through the desert floor, he sensed something vast stirring beneath them, an intelligence older than language, awakening to his small, improbable act of kindness. The days that followed rewrote the rhythm of the colony. Patrol drones traced tighter orbits, cannons remained primed, and the atmosphere itself seemed to vibrate with the tension of 2 civilizations watching each other through dust and silence. Yet every morning, Ethan walked beyond the perimeter to the edge of the dunes, tin in hand. The hatchlings came without fear now, circling him like curious machines learning a new protocol. They communicated in patterns, tones, pulses, heat bursts, each day more deliberate. Ethan began to record them on his wrist pad, mapping their frequencies into spectral graphs. What he found was staggering: their sound waves carried subharmonics identical to the planet's geothermal resonance. They weren't just alive, they were synchronized with Cindervale itself, as if their bodies were extensions of the world's pulse. The scientists ignored his reports. They saw only threats, not data. "Dragons are myth," said Dr. Hollis over a flickering holocall. "You're projecting instinct onto aberrations." But when the seismic reading spiked again, proving something enormous moved beneath the crust, even command fell silent. That night, Ethan returned to the ridge. The hatchlings were restless, wings flickering with bioluminescent veins that brightened and dimmed in slow rhythm. When he played back his recorded tones, they responded, each one releasing a harmonic frequency that aligned with the recording. It wasn't random. They were communicating through resonance. He realized then that sound, to them, was language and memory combined. A deep tremor rolled through the ground. The hatchlings lifted their heads in unison, trilling softly. Ethan's wrist pad went black. The electromagnetic field surged, cutting all transmissions. A red aurora rippled across the horizon, impossible for a world without a magnetic atmosphere. The colony alarmed, defensive grids roaring to life. From the direction of the fissure field came a roar, not of rage but awakening. Ethan could feel it through his bones, something colossal rising far below. The hatchlings turned to him, trembling, eyes wide with instinctive fear. They pressed close, their heat wrapping around him like living armor. The vibration intensified until pebbles floated in the air, gravity distorting. The sand split open in a spiral pattern, releasing a blast of light that blinded him. Through the flare, he glimpsed metallic reflections too vast to comprehend, scales the size of solar panels, eyes glowing like twin suns beneath the surface. The dragons fell silent. Then, one by one, they began to sing, a low, haunting chorus that merged with the planet's hum. Ethan dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, but beneath the pain was awe. This wasn't a species rebirth, it was the planet remembering its heartbeat. When the tremor faded, the hatchlings retreated, leaving him alone on the cooling sand. Overhead, the colony's fleet descended, engines casting shadows like blades. Through the dust, Ethan could see the future forming. Command would see this as an invasion. But he understood now, the dragons weren't rising for war. They were calling for balance, and humanity's machines were too deaf to hear the song. The fleet broke through Cindervale's thin clouds like a row of silver knives, engines burning blue, hulls glimmering with insignia. Every colonist looked up. To them it was salvation. To Ethan it was the loudest misunderstanding in history. He stood on the ridge with dust on his face and the hatchlings behind him, shivering at the frequency of the ships. Their bodies, tuned to the planet's pulse, recoiled from the artificial roar pouring from orbit. Unidentified bioforms, disperse, the lead corvette broadcast. Cannons unfolded from its underside, lenses rotating, measuring heat signatures, 4 young dragons, 1 human out of formation. The targeting systems didn't care that the younglings had accepted bread from that human. They read only threat gradients. Beneath the sand, the tremor that had begun earlier rose again, more insistent. Ethan felt it in his teeth. He shouted into his wrist pad, demanding a ceasefire, forwarding every scan he had recorded, but the commander's face appeared in a cold hollow. We cannot risk a nest. Stand down, Cole. The transmission cut. The ship's cannons charged, gathering pale energy. The hatchlings keened in panic. Their cries layered into a harmonic shield, a desperate attempt to reach whatever slept below. The ground answered. The desert split in a spiral of molten glass. What rose from the fracture shouldn't have fit inside memory. She surged upward like a mountain waking, wings blotting out the sun, scales gold-streaked with obsidian. Her chest glowed with internal plasma, a living reactor. Sensors on the ships went wild, misreading her as a mobile geothermal event. Alarms erupted in orbit. The Queen saw the fleet first. Her eyes narrowed. Instinct told her machines in the sky meant fire, slaughter, the end of clutches. Her throat swelled. But before she released that star-bright breath, the hatchlings ran to Ethan. They circled him, pressing warm sides against his legs, projecting the resonance they had shared over meals. Memory, scent, tone, broadcast not at him but upward, toward her. For a heartbeat the Queen's mind filled with images she had not lived, a small creature breaking food, offering it without claws, younglings fed, not hunted, a world where flame wasn't answer anymore at all. Her head dipped. The fleet misread the motion as an attack posture. Target lock snapped in. The sky, the sand, the ancient dragon and the lone human balanced on the edge of a war that a piece of bread had already disproved. The first shot never came. For a moment that stretched like eternity, both sky and earth held their breath. Ethan stood between worlds. The metallic voice of command echoing through his headset, the thunder of the Queen's pulse shaking the air. Around him, the hatchlings trembled, their bodies glowing faintly in unison. A low vibration rippled outward, the same harmonic signature that Ethan had recorded before, but this time magnified 1,000-fold. The Queen's mind brushed his, not in words, but through pure sensation. He saw flashes of memory, firestorms over alien oceans, eggs hidden deep within planetary cores, centuries of silence as her kind fled humankind's expansion. And then, through her, she saw his memories, a small human offering food instead of fire, for younglings accepting peace without understanding why. The resonance climbed, forming a perfect harmonic bridge between dragon and machine. Sensors on the fleet spiked into chaos. Artificial intelligences within the warship struggled to interpret the signal, mistaking it for a communication protocol. One by one, the drones froze midair, their targeting lights flickering out. The resonance had integrated with the colony's systems, biological frequency syncing with synthetic design. For the first time, 2 incompatible forms of intelligence shared a single rhythm. Ethan didn't move. He lifted the battered lunch tin, the last piece of bread still inside, and placed it on the sand between them. The Queen's gaze fell upon it, a small, meaningless gesture against the immensity of her form. Yet she understood. Her massive head bowed, and the tremor in the ground softened. When the fleet's commander finally broke through the interference, her voice was small, uncertain. "Cole, what did you do?" He looked up at the ship still suspended in the red sky. "I listened." In that instant, the Queen spread her wings, their span eclipsing the sun. A single beat sent a shockwave across the dunes, not destructive, but cleansing. The sand glowed, reshaping into glassy ripples that hummed faintly like crystal under pressure. The hatchlings rose beside her, voices joining hers in perfect harmony. Then the light dimmed. The dragons took flight, not as invaders, but as exiles returning home. The fleet did not fire. The colony fell silent, its machines still resonating with the echo of the dragon's farewell. Weeks later, life resumed. Terraformers rebuilt the hangars, and engineers studied the residual frequencies left in the soil. They called it the Cole resonance, the first recorded moment of biomechanical communication between species. Ethan stayed by the dunes, the tin still on his belt, its edges worn smooth. Sometimes, at sunset, the sand would hum faintly beneath his boots, as if answering a song too vast for words. Humanity had built empires on logic and conquest, but on Cindervale, peace had been born from something far simpler, a meal shared between hunger and hope, under an alien sun.